OPEC Fund have long been cognizant of the need to support universal access to modern energy, well before it was announced in SDG 7. In 2019, building on their Energy for the Poor initiative and coupled with the slow start in the implementation of the Paris Agreement, the OPEC Fund approved its Strategic Framework 2030, which reaffirmed SDG 7 as one of our development priorities. Since then, the OPEC Fund, together with its co-financing partners, many of whom are present here today, has been working to intensify its contributions to the Paris Agreement by targeting projects, programs, and initiatives that will move the needle in terms of emissions and at the same time provide access to modern energy to the most vulnerable. Through our sovereign and non-sovereign operations, as well as grants, the OPEC Fund finances a broad range of actions. These include, for example, support to countries with their national determined contributions, support to small island states, who, as we all know, are on the front line of the battle against climate change and are fighting to limit global warming to a maximum of 1.5, not 2 degrees, in order to survive. Additionally, the OPEC Fund supports investments in energy efficiency, energy access, and renewable energy projects. These include a wide range of operations, from capital-intensive projects to small individual energy systems, and most recently, clean cooking.
RMI for the past 40 years has been on a mission to transform the global energy system to secure a clean and prosperous and zero-carbon future for all. My job as Senior Director of the Energy Transition Academy is to ensure that leaders from the Global South are not marginalized from this discussion. Your Excellency, at the current rate of global warming, almost 80% of the Maldives could become uninhabitable by 2050. Your President Ibrahim Mohammed Solid, His Excellency, told the COP26 summit in Glasgow that our islands are slowly being inundated by the sea, one by one. So I wonder if you can tell us, what can happen in COP27? What would happen if no climate action is taken for the Maldives?
Today, the climate emergency not only poses an economic and developmental challenge, but also threatens our island and affects our way of life. We face a high risk of damages from climate change, including increased likelihood of violent storms, coral reef bleaching, beach erosion, flooding, destruction of infrastructure and homes, loss of fishing, agriculture, and tourism livelihoods. 90% of the islands have reported flooding annually, 97% report shoreline erosion, and 64% experience serial erosion. We are spending from our national budget to protect our islands from these damages and protect our livelihoods. 50% of our housing structures are within 100 meters of the coastline. Due to limited land space, most critical infrastructure is within the short distance of the sea. Inaction is not a choice for Maldives, sir. Although the emissions produced by the Maldives is negligible, we will suffer the impacts of further global delays in reducing emissions. And I would also want to stress that inaction is also not a choice for anyone. The impacts of climate change are widespread and can already be seen globally, not only for the Maldives.
Electricity in Malawi stands at 19%, of which 12.4% is on-grid connection and 6.6% is off-grid. Of that 19%, 4% is what is in the rural areas. So obviously that's a very small margin for the rural communities. At the moment we're having major problems in Malawi with regards to blackouts. So we have what we call load shedding, and I'm sure we experience that across the board in other African countries and elsewhere in the world. Our plan is to have universal access to electricity in 2030, with 30% from on-grid connections and 70% off-grid connections. Our president, His Excellency Dr. Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, and Mozambique's president, His Excellency Mr. Felipe Nyusi, recently jointly launched the Mozambique-Malawi Interconnector, which is expected to be commissioned by 2023. Also in the pipeline is the hydraulic power project at Lower Songwe, to be shared between Malawi, 90 megawatts. A dam is to be built, schools, jobs are to be created. So we're looking upon financiers to assist us with this project. The return on investment is very good because you'll be able to sell that electricity to Malawi and to Tanzania and get funding back for that project. There's schools, hospitals, clinics, roads, and 400,000 people. 400,000 people will be living in that area. So that's already creating a city on its own.
Let me take this conversation to the financial institutions indeed. How do we re-energize climate action and financing climate resilience in the light of the current events in Ukraine, and particularly the impact of those events in the food supply, inflation, and energy security across the world?
It is a very complex system of linkages which really gives a lot of pressure on all of us, on all countries with regards to inflation, high price levels, raw material prices, and it's very difficult to solve all the problems by ourselves. And all these shocks really put a lot of pressure on all countries, not only in developing countries, but also in the industrialized world. Therefore, we strive in Europe to create and to accelerate the development of new technologies, to diversify supply chains, to have a better energy mix, and really to go ahead with climate-friendly energy sources, climate-friendly infrastructure, storage facilities, hydrogen. And I think in Austria we have a very good technology to come up with all these things. As a development bank, we have, for example, also supported on the island Maldives swimming solar panels. It was also a very good and new innovative program from an Austrian investor where we decided to fund this very interesting project, and due to the fact that islands have only little land available, you have to reduce CO2 emissions, it was a very good solution to combine not only rooftop solars on the hotel roofs, but also to combine it with swimming solar panels. And the swimming solar panels are helping to reduce CO2 emissions and also to help the country with climate disasters. And in Africa, we support a lot via funds and financial intermediaries, but also with direct funding, where we provide off-grid solar solutions, especially for rural areas, because the construction of electricity grids would be by far too expensive, because people need affordable prices. And it's very expensive to have everything on grid.
I think when it comes to the work of a development bank, there is really no topic more important than the topic of technology. Because in fact, all of development progress can be characterized as a process that was kicked off by technology and by innovation. From time immemorial, from fire and the wheel, all through the millions of innovations that dominate our world today. The critical question is, what is our core strategic value add in this ecosystem? What does the world need that other organizations are not capable to provide that we are capable to provide? And what I believe more than anything else is that capacity to be an intermediary, to find and diligence working solutions and business models, and help them access extremely complex environments. Emerging frontier markets are hard places to do business, but organizations like ours have had a long presence, have people on the ground who understand the ecosystem and have relationships with government. And so, to come back to your question, what is the role of technology in development? I think it's absolutely central. What is the role of development organizations? I would argue that one of those roles that we have not yet, I think, filled at scale is the capacity to be an effective intermediary between ideas that are already working, i.e. not at the seed stage, and markets that need them, but that struggle to access them or to diligence them or to build the understanding and the links required.
The cost of inaction against climate change is projected to rise, especially taking into account the knock-on effects of food security, disaster relief, water shortages, and also increased migration due to climate disasters. There is evidence that it is possible to decouple greenhouse gas emissions from GDP growth, as demonstrated by the countries in the European Union. But this is easier for developed countries than developing countries with rapidly rising energy requirements to fuel growth.
Thinking about reforms, energy reform, what lessons have you learned in the passing of these energy reforms in the context of Malawi?
The Malawi government has amended the Electricity Act. We are unbundling of the ESCOM, Electricity Supply Commission of Malawi, and creating a remnant ESCOM, Electricity Generation Company, a GENCO, and a Power Market Limited, PIL. We've also improved in terms of the climate for investors, cutting on red tape and encouraging investors to come in, making sure the procurement procedures are cut short, because sometimes there was a delay when projects come in that before we had done all this, there were major delays in all the sectors in terms of the procurements, and once that is delayed, then it was like a chain reaction whereby electricity goes out slower to the rural masses and within the city as well. It was a major issue.
You must really have a strategy how you solve all these problems globally, yeah? And I think the best way is that the public sector has to be in a very effective, intensive cooperation with the private sector, especially with multilateral development banks, national development banks, that we can really find solutions and develop solutions with demonstration effects, and then we should scale up these solutions and bring it to the commercial players, to bring in the commercial side, because we need the private sector players, we need to mobilize private sector monies, otherwise the public sector is not in the position to come up with these trillions of dollars. And on the other hand, we need not only money, we need also knowledge and how to structure more quickly, because we have not the time to do too complex things and to be always in the competition, and all the players must be more coherent with their instruments and how instruments are used in which level of development.
You know, we don't have enough innovators in our ecosystem. And because we don't have enough innovators in our ecosystem, we don't challenge and re-challenge the core assumptions of our business models frequently enough. It's something we've got to force ourselves to do. So I think that, to answer your question, I think absolutely we are not as efficient as we should be. We're not as efficient as the world should insist we must be. How do we raise that level of efficiency? I think more than anything, the questions, the most important set of answers lie in the arena of strategy and business model. We talked earlier about how should we be thinking about technology. And the example that I gave there about thinking about our organizations as an intermediary between ideas that can have impact and ecosystems where they should have impact, where that intermediary doesn't yet exist, but we may have a set of assets that can drive that. I think that's just one example. I think that there are a number of other examples where official sector institutions, whether it's the multilateral development banks, whether it is governance bodies, could be thinking more innovatively about their role. I just closed by saying that I think that there's a really interesting opportunity for more nimble public sector institutions, and I would certainly count the OPEC fund on that list, to be the innovators in this ecosystem, to trial the business models that can ultimately scale in larger organizations where it's sometimes hard to build consensus amongst a very disparate group of shareholders to do things. But if others trial them, then we can also follow on.
As a Minister of Finance, it's always, for me, money is part of the problem. You know, the Maldives is also, often asked to demonstrate the scientific rationale of proposed climate change mitigation and adaptation projects before donor partners are willing to support the critical projects. It takes 3, 4, 5 years. This requires significant financial and technical resources and large delay. This often means by the time the project is approved, the island in question is already eroded. So it is a problem for us. We need to bring transformational changes to existing financial architecture to support climate actions. Innovative financing solutions must be brought forward that are flexible, quick, and align with the context that small island states operate in. Easy and early development modalities and removing the red tape and barriers are critically important for accessing this support required to accelerate mitigation action. MDBs and other IFIs can play an important role in expediting this process. You know, we have been having this conversation for a long time, stressing the need for additional climate finance globally at a scale that can have an impact, but we have not seen that so far. $100 billion per year by 2020 was pledged for climate finance at COP15 in 2009. This has unfortunately still not been reached. A few $1 million on standalone projects contribute little to the transformational change that the science on climate change calls for. For true access to climate finance, it needs to be affordable.
I would like to concur with the Minister of Finance from the Maldives that sometimes the financing comes in a little bit slow and takes a few years while a lot of the work that needs to be done on the ground is suffering.
I think it's important really to think and to build a new architecture and to establish inclusive partnerships. This is very important, and inclusive economic models. Sometimes it is not only the growth model, it's important to have inclusivity and that really each and every country is supported in a strategic way. And I think this is something where we can do more.
Inaction is not a choice, that's one of the key words, and climate change challenges and energy needs is not a zero-sum game. So I think we have everything in place to take the next steps. Thank you so much.